Thanks for inviting me. Then let me try to bring up a few issues that might provoke a discussion too. I'll copy Bernd's introduction. I'm working for the European Cultural Foundation only shortly. I happen to know them for quite some time. One of my previous jobs, I was the project leader for a series of programs that was called Arts in Conflict, where we invited artists to come over to my hometown, Utrecht in the Netherlands, and present work on conflicts elsewhere, or conflicts in our own society. And we might see Brexit as an example of a conflict in our own society where two groups have not been discussing with one another. One of the projects that I was able to program was the House of Utopia by the Belgian artist Philippe Bertha from Ghent. In his House of Utopia, he portrayed the European history, the dark side of the European history in 5 rooms, and invited people to enter all the 5 rooms and up on this attic, and in the attic write their idea about what Europe could be in what he called the People Constitution of Europe. The European Cultural Foundation was one of the early supporters of the work of Philippe Bertha, House of Utopia. And that is when the European Cultural Foundation appeared on my horizon, and I thought this is a brave foundation if they are supporting an artist like this. And then if you're looking at what the European Cultural Foundation is writing down in its mission and its vision, it's a 6-year-old foundation, that Europe has always been more than coal and steel, free trade and one currency. Culture is essential. So the European Cultural Foundation for 60 years has been pleading for putting culture at central stage in European policies. Perhaps to prevent this not speaking to one another that is happening these days in Europe. Very shortly, European Cultural Foundation is supporting, connecting, advocating for culture, not because it is nice to have when all other needs are satisfied, but it's a cornerstone to try to understand one another. So you might also conclude right away that the European Cultural Foundation is looking at culture in a broader sense, not only for professional artists or for professional cultural actors. We see culture as the means in which everybody is acting, and so we include cultural change makers to be part of our granting programs. For the upcoming years, we might be working with the slogan, democracy needs imagination, as imagination feeds democracy. We need space to think, we need to find other narratives to think about than just the economic rewarding policies or what will it bring for us. On industrial terms, then getting to the few points mentioned here is uncertainty. We are supporting artists and cultural change makers in wider Europe, meaning also non-EU member states, and also meaning the Middle East and Northern African countries. I think many artists or cultural change makers active in these countries have to deal with even bigger uncertainties than we now have to do in the European Union ourselves. And that the uncertainty how to deal with a future that is not laid out completely is something that we can learn a lot from. If you were talking about how to appreciate freedom of travel when there was no freedom of travel before, I think we can learn a lot from other people in other parts of wider Europe on how to deal with our uncertain future. And what we are doing as ECF is having, when the word access to talent was dropped here in this panel, one of the things we do as the European Cultural Foundation is supporting people to travel all over Europe. The Erasmus program, I suppose most people here know, is one of the examples that European Cultural Foundation has once thought of. Now we're doing this for upcoming artists. If you're younger than 35 or you have less than 10 years of professional career, it's very easy to come to ECF, ask for a small grant, and you can just go and learn somewhere else, travel back. And why do we do this? Because we believe that if you collaborate with other people in another place, something happens with you, and you might want to have social impact in your own surroundings. So one of the other things that we have worked on over the last few years, talking about social impact, is building a network of what we call cultural hubs from various countries in Europe, ranging from Moldova in the east to Spain in the south to Sweden in the north, which we call the Connected Action for the Commons. Commons, as most of you might be knowing, is this place where we negotiate together how we want to shape our future. And if we were listening to the words of Julie Ward, who was also present at the Commons Assembly, which happened in the European Parliament in November, this Commons is where artists can help people that want to define their problem with our current democratic troubles. How to think about this, how to transform communities, how to work on local solutions for a global program. And our Connected Action for the Commons network, we see it as a change-maker movement, which is an example of something broader than really cultural actors. And I think if there's the challenge, as Bernd put forward, for cultural actors to take up this challenge of how to reimagine democracy, how to reimagine our societies by means of culture, that's our Connected Action for the Commons is a pretty good example of doing this. And then, of course, there's the question, it is very much nice to say so, and it's also very nice to say that we have been doing this for 60 years, but still, we're not living in paradise, so apparently there's also tools lacking how to make sure that we're going to be on the right road. And one of the things that is good to measure is what kind of social impact is these actions having. Can we also measure if supporting cultural change makers is resulting in a more livable society where more equality is important. So I was wondering also, Jill, when you were talking about the actions that artists undertook prior to the Brexit vote, have you been trying to evaluate if the people that have been visiting these expositions or that were active in these community art projects voted differently than their counterparts which did not take part in projects like this? Maybe for something for later, because it's my last line. My colleague Sveta was sitting here, and some others worked on what we call the indicator framework for culture and democracy, where the connection between cultural change-making and levels of democracy is laid out, and it's an asset people might use to see whether this challenge of using culture for a more democratic society actually works out. Thank you.